Hi everyone, this is a response to JHMDF's My Gaming History video. I told him I'd do a response to it in a PM or whatever they're called here on YouTube last night. Yeah, it's basically the history of my gaming. It's actually kind of half remembered, garbled up in my memory, because honestly I wasn't really all that much of a gamer until like the late 90s when I was about 10. Maybe even a little after that. But anyway, I suppose my first gaming memory, I should start with that. I was probably like 2 or 3, and I had a cousin who would play video games a lot. She would have her Nintendo hooked up, and she would just sit me down and we'd play like Mario or Duck Hunt, and she'd say like, "Oh hey James, you're playing." You know, she'd hand me a controller that wasn't connected, and I actually did that with my little cousin as well. Yeah, and if it actually was Duck Hunt, I'm pretty sure that I was hooked up and she was just trying to shoot the duck that I was controlling, and I didn't know that I was controlling the duck. That actually works. A lot of people think it's like an urban legend, but it does. Try it. It's actually one of the more fun two-player experiences on the NES, even though Duck Hunt's not that good of a game, honestly. From there, again, not really well remembered because, like, 4 or 5 years old, I'm not going to remember that. But I actually had to look up the release date on this game because it actually kind of screws up my recollection a little bit that it was released at this point in time. The first game console I ever owned was a Model 2 Sega Genesis. And I remember distinctly the first game I ever played in it. The first game cartridge I ever put in it was Mortal Kombat 3. Which really means that I got into gaming sort of at an older age than I thought. I was 6 because the game was released in, I think it was April of 1995. Which puts me at least 6 years old. And it could have been more than that, actually. Excuse me. Yeah. And that kind of leads me to the next little thing I remember as a gamer when I was a kid. If you were in my elementary school, and you were a boy, and you did not have any of the Mortal Kombat games, you were a social pariah. If your parents were like overprotective or religious or something, and they didn't want you playing that violent stuff, life sucked for you. And the other kids in school made sure that it did. You know, it could be the Super Nintendo or the Genesis versions. You were allowed to have either, and you had to have at least one, because everyone had at least one. It's like every group of friends had the entire Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, and maybe like Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. A few lucky kids had that. I was one of them. And they would get together and play these games. If you had the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat and that was the only one you had, you were a lame ass, because that one didn't have violence in it. Oh, it was a better game than the Genesis version, a better port of the arcade version, the controls were a little better. A lot of people said, I don't think so. I prefer the Genesis controller for the Mortal Kombat games. But the thing is, we weren't playing the game for any reasons other than the over-the-top blood and gore. I mean, why the hell else would you play that game, right? I mean, they're good games, but that's not what we cared about. We were 8-year-old boys. I actually, when all the big controversy was was around, my mother was pretty much one of the only mothers who didn't have any problem with it. A lot of the other mothers were like, "Oh God, why are our kids playing this game? This awful, horrible game, it'll warp their brains. How about this, lady? You take it away from them. Be a parent. You know, or sit down and explain it to them. You know, no, of course not. You're too busy with your, like, I don't know, whatever mothers in 1995 did. You're too busy having shoulder pads in your pantsuits and your job as a secretary or something. I don't know. I remembered a lot of my friends' mothers were secretaries and they all had like pantsuits. But yeah, it was really... That was the thing. If you didn't have Mortal Kombat, you were a social pariah. Every once in a while, there was a game that if you didn't have it, you were an outsider. You were not welcome. Donkey Kong Country was another one of those. I never had Donkey Kong Country, but I actually kind of kept it a secret that I got a Super Nintendo and didn't own that. I only had like maybe a half dozen games for it. I think I had like Kirby's Avalanche and Samurai Showdown. But yeah, the next generation, it was GoldenEye. If you didn't have GoldenEye, oh, you poor son of a bitch. I got... The next chapter on this, I guess, before I go back to that, is, like, late 90s, probably like 97, 98. One of my cousins went off to college, and I was up here in New York visiting my dad for the summer, and her parents were like, hey, you like video games, right? You want a Nintendo? I'm like, is the Pope Catholic? I didn't say that. I was 8. I didn't know about the Pope or Catholic. I don't... but yeah, of course, I took it. I remember they had like Mario Brothers, Bubble Bobble, and Top Gun on it. I think those were the 3 games. There might have been more. My standalone copy of Mario might still be that game. I don't know. I know I don't have Top Gun anymore, and my copy of Bubble Bobble is a fairly recent purchase, but yeah, that was another like highlight in my gaming career, I guess you'd call it. It was the first old console I had. I mean, I had the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo when they were starting to get old, like when the PlayStation just came out and no one owned it yet. But yeah. Oh, that's another thing. I remember going back to the console wars. I never experienced that. For some reason, that never caught on, as far as I can remember, in my elementary school or middle school. Nobody fought the console wars. It's like, everyone wanted a Sega Genesis if they had a Super Nintendo, and everyone wanted a Super Nintendo if they had a Genesis. No one was like, oh, this one's better than this one. It's like, yeah, the Genesis is better, but that Super Nintendo's pretty cool. I want that. Mom, can I have a Super Nintendo? You know, I also really distinctly remember one kid had a NeoGeo. He was the rich kid. Of course, the rich kid had the NeoGeo. And when we were having that argument about which was better, it was funny that it never got heated into a fight. I mean, we would get into fist fights over anything. Like, oh, your shoes suck. I'm gonna punch you, you know? But it's like the biggest debate among elementary school age boys in the 90s. It's like, well, you have a good point, sir, but I would like to say that blast processing is something Sega made up and it's not a real thing. But Mode 7 is. Shit like that. It would be civil, or as civil as 8-year-olds can get. But yeah, the NeoGeo kid, he would just like look at us like, plebeians, with your tiny little toys. I have the greatest game console ever made. It plays arcade perfect ports. I don't know why he suddenly has a snooty rich guy accent. I think he might have actually been British, but I don't know. No one ever hung out with him because he was an asshole. But we should have, because he had a NeoGeo. That's kind of awesome. Make some excuse to hang out with that jerk. No one liked him, but I think one kid had a TurboGrafx 16. Oh yeah, no, he was in the losing party in the console wars. He probably got his ass kicked for that, which is kind of ironic, because I think I might have given him shit for that, but I want a TurboGrafx 16 now. I don't even know why. It's because I'm a collector. Well, I think that the moment when I started to really get into gaming was like the late 90s, like 1998, 99. I think I got Final Fantasy VII the Christmas it was released, like right around there. and a PlayStation 1 at that exact point. And at the same time, I also think that's when I got my copy of Ocarina of Time, and like Metal Gear Solid, and the Pokemon games on Game Boy. And it's like, that was the moment that I went from, like, I'm doing this because everyone else is doing it, to, holy crap, I love this stuff, you know? And because of that, like, the late 90s is still, like, my favorite era of gaming. I mean, I'm a Genesis guy at heart, it's my favorite console, but you can't beat the PlayStation 1, I'm sorry. I still think it's got the best library of games ever. And this is considering that it's competing with the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, and the Genesis. And the PlayStation 2 for that title. And the GameCube, you know, the small but amazing overall quality games of the N64 and GameCube. You know, and I think, like, yeah, I was just obsessed with Final Fantasy games. I had all of them. I still have my old copies of 7, 8, and 9, and the box for 7 is just beat to hell. The game still works. It has a lot of scratches on it, but it still works. I play through it every year or so. Maybe not to completion, but I play through it. It's still my favorite game, even though every time I play it, I see so many flaws with it. It's like, I could honestly say, if I had played that for the first time, like, today, I would probably hate Final Fantasy VII. But because I played it as a kid, I love it, and I appreciate it, not in spite of all of its flaws, but because of all of its flaws. Because I can sit and make fun of that game viciously, but still just be enjoying myself and enjoying the game and the way it's meant to be enjoyed. I think it's an amazing game. I still think Final Fantasy VI is a better game overall, but man, 7, it's just got a special place in my heart. 8, not so much. 9, I really like. It took me a long time to actually love that game, but like in recent years, I've been like, 9 was really a damn good game, you know? The world map music in that is one of my favorite game songs ever, but man, digression into Final Fantasy. Yeah, I also had Anthology, which I think might have been part of my trip back into retro gaming. The fact that I had Final Fantasies 5 and 6 on a PlayStation discs, and just that might have been what got me into that. Like, I want to play more of these. Then, like, I remember, like, the mid-2000s, I started kind of getting back into those older games. I remember 2 games specifically I picked up at a used game store. Ogre Battle 64 for like $40, and it's fantastic. I loved it. And Silent Bomber, obscure PS1 game. It's one of my favorite games ever. I think it was like 20-something. So yeah, I was paying, like, my allowance on old games that none of my friends cared about. And they looked at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why would you sit down and play this game for 5 minutes? I'm like, okay, you got a point. And then maybe if they didn't see my point, we just play some Twisted Metal and run over pedestrians. That's always fun, right? Yeah, and really, I think the last step towards me becoming a collector and a retro gamer at heart was the angry video game nerd, which I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. It's like he got me into, like, retro gaming and my little thing of bad game enthusiast. I love bad games, and I love bad movies. I even love bad music. If I can sit and make fun of it for being awful, I will, and I'll enjoy myself doing it. Provided it's not, like, painfully awful. But yeah, he got me back into it. And I actually, for years, wanted to, like, make my own reviews. I have a few shot on my old piece of crap desktop here from years ago, and I will never show those online, because it's really just me cursing and yelling and just repeating other game reviewers, pretty much. Occasionally word for word. Like, I remember my Batman Forever review, I think, has lines blatantly stolen from Fat Man Judgeth. And I think from an Armake 21 review, it was something else. It's horrible, but it's also like 16 minutes long and like 3 gigs big because I didn't know how to compress it. I still really don't, but also I don't care. Yeah, I think that's really most of the story. I will say, though, that, like, the last generation, like, towards the end of it, I started becoming more and more enthusiastic about current-gen games as well. Like, with, like, Oblivion, Fallout 3, Skyrim, a handful of cheaper games that I could get for a low price, which I think is one of the reasons I collect vintage retro games, because a lot of the good ones are pretty damn cheap, and you can get something for $5, it'll hold your attention for hours, and it's totally worth it. But, yeah, I just got a few cheap games, a few of them got horrible reviews, and I love them, like Alpha Protocol and Wet. I mean, I love those games, but no one else did. So I got Alpha Protocol for like $9. Awesome. Yeah, I hope this isn't too rambly and incoherent. I hope this didn't go on too long. I'm gonna have to stretch it into 2 parts, but whatever. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this long-winded, incoherent rant of mine about how you were a social pariah if you didn't have Mortal Kombat 2 or 3 or whatever. Yeah, thank you for watching. If you like this or any of these other videos I've made, and I can't imagine why you would, a little bit of self-deprecating humor, folks, I'm not serious, then like, subscribe, leave a comment down there. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.